There's a moment in every life that doesn't look dramatic from the outside. Nothing explodes, no doors slam, and no one announces that everything has changed. It's just a quiet realization that the way that you've been moving through the world doesn't fit anymore. That the explanations you've been living inside aren't enough to carry you forward. That something in you is asking for more truth and less autopilot. That moment isn't about becoming someone new. It's about realizing you already have a choice and maybe you always did. And maybe the most honest thing that you can say is, I don't want to keep living like this. Not because your life is the worst and not because you're falling apart, but because you're tired of surviving inside your own patterns. If you've ever had that moment where you realize that you're functional but not free, you're in the right place. Welcome back to The Void and the Flame. I'm Rachel, or Ray, if you prefer, and this is season 2. And I want to be really clear about what this season is and what it isn't. Not to draw lines, but to create honesty, to create safety, to create a container that actually holds. I'm not here to tell you that something outside of you is responsible for your life. And I'm not here to pretend that awareness alone creates change. And I'm not here to confuse understanding your past with being stuck inside it. Because at a certain point, healing stops being about what happened and really starts being about what you choose to do next. And I want to say this carefully. This isn't about blame. This isn't about pressure. This isn't about doing anything perfectly. A lot of people hear the word work and immediately tense up. So let me be honest about what I mean. This isn't heavy work. Most of the time, it's actually lighter than what you've been carrying unconsciously for years. Because when you stop living on autopilot, you stop paying interest on old pain. This space is for people who want to come back into themselves, for people who want their life to feel like it belongs to them again, or maybe even for the first time. For people who are curious about what might change if they slow down enough to notice where choice already exists. You don't have to do this all at once, and you don't have to do it loudly. You don't have to do it perfectly. Hell, you don't even have to do it at all if you don't want to. But it only works if it's chosen. And because this is a new season and the start of a new year, it feels important to name what actually changed for me this past year. This year taught me something I never took seriously before, and I really want you to hear this because it was something I really needed to hear. And unfortunately, I was not finding this information readily available. So when I say this, I want you to really, really hear this. Self-preservation isn't selfish. I'm going to repeat that. Self-preservation isn't selfish. It's clarifying. And I have to tell you that once I stopped organizing my life around other people's comfort, everything started to move with like less resistance. Not perfectly, not quickly, but honestly. When you start putting your focus on you and the things that you want, listening to your body, and actually honestly owning that, moving through the world like that, having hard conversations with people, even if it may result in the end of a relationship, that is important. Self-preservation is not selfish. It's clarity, it's honesty, and it's yours. So you get to decide how you choose to use it. I'm going to say something here that I wish somebody had said to me sooner. And I'm going to say it to you with warmth because that's how I try to always deliver everything if I can. But season 2 is not for people who want to outsource responsibility. Now, when I say that, I have seen an ongoing trend of people, and I can even say at one point myself included, definitely guilty as charged, using their past trauma and the things that have happened to them as a way to just say, that's just me. I don't buy that excuse. I don't live by that philosophy because you know what? I've been through some stuff too. And the only person that saved me from that, the only person that helped me break free from that was myself. When I got really honest about what was actually my fault and what was my responsibility. Because I think I've said this in season 1, but I live by this quote, which I'm sure is not even the right way to say it. But the basis is it may not be my fault, but it is my responsibility. So it may not be your fault what happened to you, but it is absolutely your responsibility on what you choose to do with it from here and who you allow it to turn you into. So season 2 is not for people who want validation without change. It's not for people who want the universe to do the work, because that doesn't happen. And it's not for people who confuse explanation with exemption. And I'm not saying any of this to be harsh. I'm saying it because this space is sacred. It's extremely sacred to me, and I'm hoping it can become a sacred space for any of you listeners, but I'm protecting it. Not only for myself, but for you too. So season 2 is for the people who want their life back, or maybe want to own their life for the first time. You know, those people who want agency, not answers. People who are tired of repeating patterns, and people who are ready to choose, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the truth is, you don't need more information. You need more ownership. And ownership doesn't have to feel like punishment. It can actually feel like relief. I'm going to pause and give you real world context. Not the dramatic version, not the highlight reel, just what the last 6 months actually look like for me. Because this didn't happen overnight. It was this wonderful trickle effect. And it definitely didn't happen suddenly because I figured everything out. But 6 months ago, when I started this podcast, my life didn't look put together. Hell, if I'm really honest, it probably doesn't even look put together now. I wasn't calm all the time. I was calm, but not to the level that I am now. I wasn't regulated all the time. I could just spiral based on one sentence, sometimes even a word, maybe not even a word, just energy, right? And if I'm being really honest, I was just done with how bad it felt to live inside my own head. If you are an overthinker, you learn that one of the most dangerous spaces that you can be, not only just an overthinker, but if you're somebody who overthinks and then likes to beat themselves up about everything, play the shame blame game with yourself, being inside your head is the worst prison. And it is also one of the hardest ones to escape sometimes, because when you're listening to the sound of your own voice, it's really hard to not believe all of it. So I got to a point where I realized I was over how bad it felt just constantly living inside my head. And I want to name something really honestly. My life felt like it was falling apart. I know not many people actually know what happened to me back over the summer. It was a little series of things, but as detrimental as they were to my life, they were actually a blessing. It's kind of crazy. I know. Stay with me for this. The things that happened to me over the last 6 months have led me to this space of peace, calm, honesty, integrity, morals, and the ability to finally say no, or finally tell people how I feel without having to brace for impact or worry about their reactions and their responses. Because the bottom line at the end of the day, those aren't my responsibilities and they're not mine to carry. Period. My life felt like it was falling apart for a variety of reasons, and not in a movie scene way and not in a hotline crisis kind of way, but in that quiet, more dangerous way where you're functioning, you're surviving, you're doing what you have to do, but you're exhausted from being yourself, which kind of sounds bad because it almost sounds like I'm blaming myself for everything that happened. But here's where fault and responsibility come back in, because some of the things might not have been of my fault, but they were my responsibility to have handled them differently. And unfortunately, I didn't do that with certain things. And with the things I did handle differently, it created different results. And, that was information, that was data, very important and valuable information and data. And the thing is, I wasn't ignorant, I wasn't asleep. I was aware. I could explain my patterns. I could intellectualize my pain. I could connect dots like a professional, but awareness wasn't changing how I showed up in real life. So instead of making one big declaration or trying to reinvent my life all at once, I started making smaller, quieter choices. And that's what I want you to hear. It wasn't one breakthrough. It was repetition. It was 100 tiny moments of not that, not like this, not anymore. That's a big one for me. Not anymore. When you are an empathetic, nurturing type of a person, you will expel a lot of your own energy to try to keep the people around you calm, centered, safe, cared for. And a lot of times you end up realizing in the end of that you aren't getting any of that back, or at least to a degree where you think that you deserve it at this point. And that might sound selfish, but you know what? I have spent a lot of time and a lot of work on myself throughout 41, almost 42 years of life. How much time do I have left? 18 days. Not anymore is a new phrase that I will be utilizing a lot, whether I say it out loud or I just say it to myself. Not anymore. I will no longer deplete myself for peace. I will no longer give all of my energy to people that give me crumbs back. I will no longer give my being to people that want to see me drown. The podcast really became part of that process, not because I was teaching, but because I was telling the truth out loud. And when you speak the truth out loud, you can't unhear yourself. You really can't. And that is definitely different. I just want to say this is definitely different. Hearing yourself actually speak something out loud as opposed to just speaking in your head, it has a different effect. So definitely say things out loud. Anyways, back to it. So one thing I had realized with season 1 was that every episode basically was asking me the same question. And it took questioning myself repeatedly to actually see this. And each episode was asking, are you actually living what you're saying? It was a thing that I kept coming back to. Am I giving information that's actually truthful? Is it helpful? Am I going to hurt people? Because that is the last thing I want. Because it's one thing to have insight privately, but it's another thing to actually put language to it in a way that other people can hear it. It almost like forced coherence. So I couldn't pretend I believed something and then just keep acting against it, right? So the podcast didn't just document my transformation, it participated in it. If anything, maybe was even more of a catalyst than I expected. That's why I will and probably will keep saying that this season is lived. Because I'm not here giving you theory from a pedestal. I'm here giving you receipts from the inside. And I think that's far more valuable. They have that phrase that if you can't do, you teach, right? Well, I like to think I'm in a unique position where I can do and teach, finally, for the first time. And that is what I'm going towards. Now, before I talked about what changed, I want to name who I was moving as. Because when people hear about growth, they imagine chaos turned into calm, or, pain turned into peace, or purpose. Purpose, for sure. Peace, maybe not, because that wasn't really my experience. What shifted wasn't the content of my life, it was the way I decided to move inside of it. Now, for a long time, I moved through the world as someone who was highly aware, highly understanding, and quietly exhausted. I wasn't explosive. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't constantly in crisis. If anything, I was the composed one, the steady one, the one who could handle it, so to speak. I explained, I contextualized, I softened, I smoothed. I thought that meant I was regulated. But what it actually meant was I was managing myself constantly. Calm on the outside, tight on the inside. And, after interactions, even neutral ones, I felt drained without knowing why. I replayed conversations. I second guessed myself. I wondered if I'd said too much or not enough. I told myself that was just the way that my mind worked, that I was introspective, sensitive, thoughtful, and some of that was true. But underneath it, there was something else. I was abandoning myself in very quiet ways. Not by saying yes when I meant no, but by explaining when I didn't need to, by making room for other people's discomfort before even checking in with my own, by choosing peace over truth and calling it maturity. And, because it wasn't dramatic, it felt normal. And I think that's why it took me so long to actually see it. There was a moment, and I remember it clearly, not because it was dramatic. Maybe I need to find another word than dramatic, but because it felt unfamiliar. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't a big emotional conversation. If anything, it was pretty ordinary. And someone said something small, again, maybe even neutral, but my body did what it always did, right? It tightened, it scanned, it prepared the explanation to find the right words and make sure everything stayed okay. That part of me was ready, efficient, well practiced. And then something different happened. And I noticed it. Not to stop it, not to judge it, just noticed. And there was this fraction of a second where I didn't respond. And instead of deciding what to do, I decided to get curious. I wondered what would happen if I didn't follow the urge immediately. Not forever, but just for one breath. So I stayed quiet. And guess what? Nothing exploded. The room didn't collapse. The relationship didn't rupture. But something inside me sure as hell did. Because for the first time, I realized the urgency I felt wasn't truth. It was habit. And that realization landed in my body before it ever became a thought. Because remember, the body knows what the mind chooses to forget. The body knows what the mind hasn't picked up on yet. The body. That's where all of this starts. And I got to tell you, I didn't feel empowered. I didn't feel strong. What I did feel, though, was spacious. Like I had just discovered there was actually more room inside my own experience than I had originally thought. For a long time, I thought the biggest shifts in my life would come from figuring things out, because I feel like a lot of us feel like we have to figure things out. And don't get me wrong, that part mattered. Awareness matters, language matters. But somewhere along the way, I realized something quietly important. Knowing why I did something wasn't changing how I showed up in the moment. It may have explained me, put language to the things I did, but it did not move me. What changed things was noticing myself in real time, not to judge it, but to get curious about what was actually happening. Because curiosity really creates space, and space is where choice lives. Change doesn't happen in the story. It actually happens in the pause, in the space between stimulus and response. And that's where my agency came back online. Now, here's what I've learned about those moments, the ones that shape your life without asking permission. They have a pattern. Your body reacts first. A tightening, heat, a drop, a buzz. Something shifts. Your nervous system offers you a familiar route. Explain, fix, disappear, people please, control, attack, numb. Your mind builds a story to justify the route. If I don't respond right now, they'll think blank. If I don't smooth this over, it'll turn into blank. If I don't prove myself, I'll lose blank. And then, if you're not watching, you act automatically and you call it who you are. But if you can catch it, even just once, you realize something life changing. Your reaction is not your identity, it's your conditioning. And once you know that, you can actually start choosing. Now, before we move on, I want to invite you into something. And you don't have to close your eyes, you don't need to breathe in a special way. Just think of a recent moment, a text you almost sent, a conversation you replayed, maybe a yes you gave too fast. And as you bring it to mind, notice what happens in your body. Not the story, the sensation. Maybe there's a tightening, a pull, an urge to do something with it. The urge isn't the problem, it's information, it's just data. And there's often a moment right before it becomes action. It's small, it's easy to miss, and you don't even have to decide anything there. Actually, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't decide. It's get curious long enough to see that there might be other options available. Just curiosity. Now, what happens if I don't follow the urge immediately? What happens if I give it one breath? What happens if I don't abandon myself right here? That's the space that this season lives in. Not control, not perfection. Awareness with room to choose. I want to provide you with a real life example of what I mean by integration, because this is where things actually change. So I want to share something with you from my own personal life so you can actually see how it integrated, what changed, and how that presents now. Now, for a long time, my relationship with my mom has held a lot of weight in my body, not just emotionally, but physically too. There were questions, resentments, grief for what I didn't get. And recently something shifted. And that's not because the past changed and not because everything suddenly made sense, but because I was finally able to see her as a whole person, not just the place where my pain began. And I had a conversation with her recently where I learned more about our family history. And what surprised me wasn't the information itself. It was how my body responded. It didn't feel like the familiar tightening. I didn't feel the need to defend or explain. I felt steadier. And, in that sensation, something released. Not dramatic forgiveness, not forgetting, that's for sure. But just the quiet realization that I didn't need to carry the story the same way anymore. Understanding didn't excuse anything, but it did give me my energy back. I could hold compassion without collapsing into proximity. I could understand her story without abandoning my own. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about changing how much power it has over your present. That's what integration looks like. And it shows up in normal life too. A few weeks ago, I was in an Uber on my way to work, and the driver and I started talking. It was one of those conversations that just happened really easily. And somehow we got into talking about positivity and stress and fault and responsibility. And I had told him something that for a very long time was really hard for me to say. And I feel like over the last year, maybe 2 years, I've really kind of been putting that information out there. But I had told him that for a long time, I actually felt like my own dark cloud. And I had to literally finally tell myself enough. Not in a motivational way, in a real way. I didn't want to keep living inside that weather system, and he thanked me at the end of the ride. He said he didn't get to have conversations like that often, which I can totally relate. And what struck me wasn't that I had said something profound. It was that I didn't feel drained afterwards. And that's how I knew something changed. It's showed up in other places in my life too. People telling me that I never have to worry about you. You are always on your game. You're so composed and calm, which I'm not always. So let's not even be unrealistic because I'm not. I am still very much human. But what I noticed was that my bounce back was really quick. My bounce back recovery time. That's what I call it. Like when you get into this like moment of really intense emotions, and sometimes you can sit there and you can stew in it for hours, days, weeks. That used to be me. I used to be a massive stewer. I would overanalyze, overprocess, overthink everything. Or I'd have conversations with people and I would leave and feel completely drained. And like, what the heck is this? Why am I so tired all of a sudden? Why is this happening? Especially social functions. So when I really started to pay attention to that and I really started to own that and own the way I felt and be very honest with myself, which led me to start being very honest with the people around me, which hasn't been the most comfortable thing. That kind of stuff really was telling me what happens when you stop performing your worth and really just start inhabiting it. You cut out the noise, you cut out the bullshit, you cut out the things that make you feel icky. And even if you don't want to completely cut them out, you at least have conversations about how to try to adjust, shift, change. That's being an adult. That's honoring yourself and the people around you, being really honest with yourself, holding yourself accountable to the choices that you make, even if there were circumstances and contexts that pushed you in that direction. It's all still your choice at the end of the day, and I will die on that hill. I will absolutely die on that hill. Because if one thing I've learned in all my years of life is that, yeah, some shitty things have happened to me and those weren't my fault, but it was absolutely my responsibility on how I chose to move through the world after that. And now I'm finally in a position where that won't destroy me anymore like it used to. So, thank you for listening. Anyways, there's another place that the shift started showing up. It wasn't public. It was in the quiet moments when I was alone with my thoughts, planning, worrying, thinking about money and timing and how to make things work, because those things didn't disappear. They still haven't disappeared. I still think about how to build what I'm creating. I still notice urgency sometimes showing up. I still want things to move, but something fundamental changed. I didn't beat myself up anymore for staying still instead of forcing productivity. There was a time when I would shame myself relentlessly for not doing enough, for dishes piling up, for laundry sitting too long, for not being on all the time. Stillness used to feel like failure, and it used to lead to depression for me, but now it feels like information. So instead of attacking myself, I acknowledge where I am. I take ownership without cruelty. I build routines slowly without punishing myself for being human. And that changed everything, because shame never made me accountable. It just kept me stuck. And what I'm doing now is quieter, but it's aligned. I say quieter. I've always been pretty quiet, if you know me. Anyways, but I'm building something that I'm actually living, and that matters more to me than fast success. There's still some urgency sometimes, but I don't let it drive anymore. I've learned that the harder I sprint towards something, the harder I tend to fall. So this season of my life isn't about rushing. It's about integrity. It's about peace. It's about building something that doesn't require me to abandon myself to maintain it. And that's how I know that this change is real, because it shows up even when no one is watching. I will give you some examples. Actually, trying to get episode 1 of season 2 recorded and out, I really wanted to have this out a week ago. And a week ago, I said, you know what? It's not happening. I understand putting timelines out there and following through. I get that. And I have tried to do that with this podcast. Sometimes that just doesn't work. It just doesn't. I am a server, and if you are any kind of empathetic person, you realize at a certain point that just engaging with other people can deplete your energy, and sometimes you just don't have it in you to push forward. And before I used to say some pretty nasty things to myself because that would be the state that I was in. And now I don't. I'm like, you know what? This is important to me. And if I rush it, it is going to feel rushed. It's going to feel fake. It's going to feel forced. And I don't want to do that with any episode that I produce and put out for you guys. That's not why I'm here. That's not what I intend to do. That's not what I want. I want to give you guys real, honest clarity and truth in what everything that I've learned in what I talked about in season one, what that looks like in real life. And through this whole process, something else actually started to happen too. And I'll be honest, I almost missed it. As I stopped managing myself so tightly, people actually started to respond differently. Not in big, obvious ways, but in subtle ways. Conversations felt easier, not deeper, which I love, but easier, less draining. I wasn't bracing before interactions. I wasn't rehearsing what to say, and I wasn't scanning for how things might land. And because of that, I was able to be more present. If something didn't land, I didn't immediately make it mean something about me. And when I did get triggered, because that still happens, I am still human, I recover faster. I bounce back faster. Less spiraling, less cleanup, less apologizing for things that didn't need apologies. And that changed my relationships. Some felt easier, some feel more distant. And, that can be uncomfortable, but it's honest. And honesty has a stabilizing effect. Understanding your past matters. Trauma matters, context matters, but understanding is not the same thing as being powerless. Trauma explains behavior, but it doesn't get to decide it forever. Accountability, the way that I mean it, isn't blame. It's noticing when a reaction belongs to the past and choosing not to hand it the steering wheel and getting curious about what happens when you don't. Sometimes the more regulated choices actually feel harder, but it's quieter, creates less damage and chaos, and it doesn't require you to betray yourself afterwards. Healing at this stage is often doing less explaining, less justifying, less reacting from patterns that don't fit who you are anymore. And once you see that choice exists, even if you might not take it, it's hard to unsee it. That's not pressure. It's actually freedom. Some people do this kind of work on their own, and some people don't want to do it alone. So I just want to put out there that I am slowly opening space for deeper one-on-one work, not to tell you what to do, but to help you hear yourself more clearly and practice choosing differently in the moments that matter. No pressure. It's just an option for the people who, know that they're ready for that kind of support. And that stuff will be out soon, early next week, my website and all that. Anyways, maybe you've seen some of my social media posts in regards to, all of my certifications and the classes I've taken and completed and the work that I've done to really be at this point in my life and try to help people, but also try to make a living doing something that I love, something that means everything to me. And that is guiding people. Not only that, but, really being able to take your agency back in life and be free and find ways to bring yourself peace. Because I can tell you one thing, the world is never going to hand you that. You really need to hand that to yourself. Now, I keep talking about this little tiny moment that people miss, right? This quiet split second or two of time I have yet to put a name to it, and I'm going to do that right now. I call that moment a choice point. So you might be at a choice point in your life if things aren't falling apart, but they don't fit anymore either. If you've done a lot of reflecting and a lot of understanding, maybe even a lot of healing, and you're realizing that insight alone isn't changing how you move in real life. If you're tired, not physically, but emotionally, tired of replaying the same reactions, tired of carrying what doesn't belong to you anymore, or if something in you knows, even quietly, that the next phase of your life isn't about digging deeper into the past, it's about learning how to live differently in the present. And, if none of that resonates, that's okay too. Just notice what, might feel familiar, because that's usually where the door is. So like I said, there's a moment most of us don't even notice because it's quiet. It happens fast. I call it the choice point, and it's the moment before, the text gets sent, before you over-explain, before you shut down, before you say yes when your body is already saying no. And here's what I want you to remember. Sometimes the most powerful thing that you can do, and I've already said this, so I'm going to repeat it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't decide. It's get curious long enough to see that you have options. That's what we're doing this season. And later this season, some of this work is potentially going to move out of the headphones and into real space in a way that feels ceremonial, symbolic, and very intentional. I'll share more when the timing is right. Alongside the main episodes, I will also be sharing short fictional stories, real life situations, imagined characters where we slow these moments down and really explore what happens when different choices are made. They're not lessons, they're not instructions, they're just meant to be mirrors. If there's one thing that I hope you take from this episode, it's not a concept. It's the reminder that choice doesn't usually arrive loudly. It shows up in the small moments, the ordinary ones, in how you pause, how you respond, in what you decide to carry, and what you finally set down. You don't have to change your whole life this season. You don't have to do anything, honestly. But if you're open to it, just notice where you already have more say than you thought. We'll take this slowly, one moment at a time, one choice at a time. And if you want a place where all of this lives, the episodes, the stories, what I'm building, there is a home for that coming very soon. Should be released next week, and I will share those details on the next episode once everything is solidified. No pressure. It's just a place to land if you want to stay connected, because one of the big things that I have come to realize through all of this is that community is extremely important. Being able to talk with people, to connect with people. And I say this as I spend most of my time alone, which is kind of crazy, but part of growing is sometimes realizing that what you have surrounded yourself with has been a thing because of your patterns and your past and the way you moved through the world. And that when you change all of that, sometimes you have to start from scratch. And I know that's a scary thought. I know that can be a very scary space for people to be in, because no one wants to feel like they are left in the middle of the ocean, floating out there all alone, waiting for the next danger to pull them under. So if you feel like you're in a moment of your life where nothing feels like it fits anymore, where you realize that you really need to start changing, or if you just need a place to land, to stay connected, and keep an eye out over the next week. And I would love to hear from you guys. I would love to hear your thoughts on season 1. If you watched it, if you didn't and you're just starting in season 2, that's okay too. I am trying very hard to design these seasons and episodes. They do kind of build upon each other, but I want to try to make them as independent as I possibly can, which is a big reason why I went with the story time addition to the weekly podcast episodes. But I would really love to hear from you. What are you looking for? What do you need? Were there things that you got from season 1 that really helped you? Were there things that really set you back? Feedback is invaluable. People like to think that when they're told something by, say, a boss or something, that it's criticism. And it's easy to look at that in that light because most things that you're unaware of or that are being brought to your attention can feel like an attack. But that's not the case. If you shift your perspective to look at things from criticism to feedback, that one little shift alone will change your life. You'll learn to stop taking things so personally. You'll own that, you know what, there's room for you to grow too. And that there's people that might say hard things to you that are out of love, not out of a desire to attack or belittle or any of those things. But that's where accountability really comes into play. So we'll probably explore that more this season. But anyways, thank you for being here. Thank you for coming back if you are a repeat listener. And until next time, remember, you don't have to keep the fire lit alone.